and welcome to HBR Talk 346, Hostile Aggressive Feminism. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, and nonsense annihilator, Lauren Brooks. And we're still on last week's subject, partly because when we look at stuff like this, there's a bit of a process that feminists use in order to cover their tracks. So a while back, I did a show with, and I may have to do this with you guys too, just so you see what I'm talking about. But I did a show with our patrons where we looked into the use of DEI and the imposition of DEI into the curriculum in elementary schools. Because, we got told that gender politics and DEI and all that was not in the curriculum. And they would show curriculum that doesn't have those phrases in it. And you wouldn't necessarily see anything in the rubric or anything like that specified, here is where you teach the kids that there are 5,000 genders, and they might be one of them, and they shouldn't talk to their parents about it and all that. And it wasn't in the main body of the curriculum, right? But you go to the curriculum and you go to the bottom of the page where it's got its sources and citations and further references or further materials that they can access to enhance their teaching in the classroom. And you start looking into those things, and they have then, the first one often is a link to a page that's just a list of, here's things you can go look at. And that list takes you to another set of things that has exercises that you can do within the classroom, but doesn't really give a full description of the exercises you can do in the classroom or the workshop sheets and stuff like that. And you get the first layer of DEI. And you start seeing this is where it's present, right? But it looks like really innocent stuff, it's anti-bullying, it's anti-homophobia, anti-sexism, anti-racism, whatever. And you're like, well, you can't be against teaching kids not to bully each other, right? So then you go to the resources. That page tells you that you need to look at to better understand and use these exercises with printouts that you can use in the classroom to help the kids understand. And there's a little more. And it's a little less innocent, maybe a little more sexual, maybe a little more blamey, has more feminist terms in it, like toxic masculinity and such, and gives you more of an idea that, hey, this is actually an attempt at brainwashing your boys into hating themselves and thinking they have to be something other than a boy in order to be accepted in society. And then there's another layer and another layer, and you usually go through 5 or 6 layers of, well, here's what you have to have in order to use these tools. Here's the tool, here's part of the tool. Be like somebody gives you the handle for the hammer and then says, but to get the actual hammerhead, you have to go to this page. And then this page describes a whole list of different hammerheads you can use, and you have to go to the next page to actually get whichever of those hammerheads you're looking for. And then when you go to the next page, it gives you the claw part or the front part, but not the other, and says, oh, you got to get the rest of it here. And you get to that last page before you find out, oh, hey, here's DEI. Oh, hey, here's feminism. Here's condemnation of masculinity. Feminists do that with their ideology inserting into the formation of law and policy, too. Like the thing that we looked at last week, where they were funding this research. And let's see here. I got to close a thing that I'm not using right now. See, I think I showed you, I highlighted, alcohol's effects on cognitive and behavioral responses in a virtuality dating simulation. Remember, we looked at this last week, and this was government-funded feminist research, which is quotes around research, because when we looked at it, we figured out pretty quickly that their process wasn't going to give them a set of information that would actually tell them anything useful. It was undermined by the fact that the participants would know that they were in an environment where their actions didn't affect real people. So it wasn't research on what an individual would do in real life. It was research on what an individual would pretend to do in a video game. And, a lot of times feminists complain about behavior that people engage in video games as if they do it in real life. But everyone who plays games is fully aware that part of the point of playing video games is to do things that you can't or wouldn't do in real life.
What, are you kidding me? I always drive over the hookers and steal all their money when I play real life, just like it's GTA.
There we go. And I go around with a big sword and a staff like my characters in Neverwinter. Casting spells and shit, and I'm accompanied by a small dragon, and I fly to work.
That is cool.
I remember jumping on my brother and killing him, and gloating over how much I killed him, because I'm Italian and my name is Mario. So I frequently jumped on my brother. I lost count of how many times I killed him.
I
don't know the difference between literally killing someone and figuratively killing someone in a video game.
Oh, and yes.
It fucked me up for life. It turned me into a serial killer of my brothers.
See, I didn't even know he had a brother, and now I know why, because he's killed them.
Exactly. Yes. I literally never had a brother, but I would think that because I killed him 1,000 times with a turtle shell.
Who you really have to watch out is Randomer Cam. Oh, geez. His videos are all backwards. And I live on an exclusive diet of wafers and cherries and ghosts. So there you go. But it's okay, guys, because I single-handedly repelled an alien invasion over and over and over again, and a demon attack.
Man, I want to play your real life.
I'm old. I like being old. I really do. Just not the part where my hip hurts all the time. And my teeth are falling out. But I like remembering old video games. But yeah, so I mean, you get the point. Obviously, it was a dumb claim for them to make that this was actual research. But despite that, they had that. They based a part of it on using this concept, hostile masculinity, right? Basically, they're assessing whether alcohol exacerbates what they refer to as a predisposition towards sexual aggression caused by pre-existing levels of hostile masculinity. And their idea of hostile masculinity is, of course, based on years of feminist postulation about this term. The thing that we looked at here, I don't think we actually read this. I think what we looked at was the description. And we might have looked at these titles last week. But I know we looked at the description for hostile masculinity, and we compared it to the fact that there's very little statement about any such thing with regard to femininity. Oh, there's no hostile femininity, right? Or if there is, it's not hostility toward the opposite sex like hostile masculinity is supposed to be. It's hostility toward other women, right? And so we looked a little bit at this overview abstract explaining the idea of hostile masculinity. We looked at what Google said that hostile masculinity meant according to its research, and we looked at what Grok said hostile masculinity and hostile femininity meant according to its research. But where did the term come from? What's the origin? Okay, it says scroll down in my chat window. I don't understand what... Are you talking about the chat window that's on the screen in the video? Because that I have no actual control over. I might have to refresh that. It might not be something I can change. I might not be able to show the comments there. Let me see. We'll see what happens if I just hit OK if it refreshes. It does not. At least not from what I can tell. This is so small on my screen that I cannot read what it says in there. In the screen video. Okay, so mocking moniker. Sorry, I don't think I can fix that. Let me try eliminating it and bringing it back. I don't understand why it's not keeping up with the actual. Yeah, that's not moving. That's very strange. I don't know. I think if I mess with this too much, I'm gonna overload it, because it does seem to be mad at me for this. Every time I try to do it, every time I try to do it, it has difficulty. It seems to. It shows the spinny I'm thinking wheel. So yeah, we're just gonna not mess with that anymore. If it doesn't work, I'm sorry about that. I'm just gonna have to leave it the way it is, because it created problems before the show. It dumped my information that allows me to go to different channels, stream to different channels, and like right before the show I had to fix that. So whatever is going on with it is probably because of that. So sorry guys, in Rumble you're not going to be able to watch the restream chat that shows all the different chats this time, because I don't apparently have access to that this time.
You don't care anyway. There's only like 5 views.
Well, I'll try to. If anybody says anything that needs answered in the other chats, I'll try to say what channel it's on and stuff. It's unfortunate, but that's about all I can really do. It sucks. I like being able to share the whole chat with people, and I don't know if it'll repopulate or not. But as long as it's actually streaming what we're doing, we'll continue with that. What a strange glitch. Like, is there any technical difficulty that doesn't happen to the Badgers? Right?
I don't think so.
So,
Not one yet.
Yeah. But anyway, that's my long-ass explanation as to why we are looking at old feminist research, because it's from like 1991 when, this one isn't. This is recent. But the one that we're going to go switch to after we look at this will be from 1991. But before we get into the actual body of the discussion, just a reminder, as always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In the light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justtip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms. Like, I basically have spent the last week trying to get myself in trouble arguing with a radfem, so there you go. So the idea of hostile masculinity comes from old research. Like, seriously, came out. The idea was proposed in the 1980s. And I think 1991 was the year cited here. Malamuth et al., 1991. The confluence model of sexual aggression is where this idea of hostile masculinity and sexual aggression came from. So we're not going to read like this whole paper. We're going to look at a few bits that are relevant to the discussion. And I want you to keep in mind when I'm reading this, the reason we're looking at this is because of that research we talked about last week, that so-called research, where they are going to attribute the attitudes and behaviors of the overall general male population in real life to the behavior of a small subset of men in a video game that they know is a video game, right? And they are filtering that behavior through this concept of hostile masculinity. So the second, it has these two concepts. The first is in regard to sexual aggression, is impersonal sex, which they've talked about for years as well. It's the idea of basically casual sex. Now, let's be clear on this one. I'm not a fan of the idea of casual sex. I think it's actually unhealthy. I think there's a lot of psychological engagement and potential damage that occurs with habitual casual sex, especially promiscuous casual sex, where the individual engages in sexual relationships with a lot of different people instead of a regular partner. I think there are things that happen psychologically that are harmful, painful, and cause suffering that get denied a lot by modern feminists, modern actually anybody that's not part of some conservative religion. And I don't believe that shaming people for it is a good way to deal with that. I think informing people of the physical aspects of that psychological connection and everything that's more important. But feminists don't treat it like that. They treat it as a right when women do it, and as something that you are not allowed to criticize, you're not allowed to deny access to, and you're not allowed to not participate in when women want to do it. But what do they say when men want to do it? It's associated with sexual aggression, right? And so they don't call it the sexual revolution that allows women to engage in a lot of casual sex. That allows women to participate in a hookup culture without being judged. They talk about it as an aspect, a characteristic of sexual aggression, right? Preference for a high frequency of non-committal casual sexual relationships with little emotional attachment. There was literally, by the way, a long-running television show in the United States following the behavior of 4 women that was the theme. Called it Sex in the City. It was very popular. I didn't watch it, but it was everywhere. It's hard to avoid it. And, it obviously did a lot for Kathy Griffin's mental health to be involved with that show. Anyway, so the hostile masculinity aspect of it, let me highlight that so you can see it, because I know it's not very big on the screen. Let's see if it'll stay highlighted. Hostile masculinity is a set of traits associated with an insecure, defensive, distrustful, hostile, and domineering orientation toward women. Like, that's the first thing. They have this whole litany, right? So if you are insecure around women, that's hostility. I want you to think about that for a minute. All right, just for a minute. Think about your school bully when you were a kid, and you're intimidated by the bully. You don't want to deal with the bully. You take steps to avoid contact with the bully. You decide, that maybe you don't need to go do this or that activity because the bully might be present there and gain access to you. That's insecure, defensive, and distrustful, right? Right there. Because you have a reason. So the first thing that I will point out with hostile masculinity is it doesn't differentiate, right? A man can have every reason in the world to be insecure around women. Maybe he is unattractive and he knows it, right? Maybe that is a solid self-assessment, and maybe he's insecure around women because he knows that they don't like him just based on that characteristic, and if he has to interact with them, that they are going to view that interaction negatively unless he takes extra measures that other men don't have to take in order to change their mind about that. So he has to be super, super nice, super, super
rich.
Yeah, super, super rich, or super, super soy. He has to praise them all the time, right? Flattery will get you somewhere. It'll get you out of social jail for having a nose that's too big or the wrong shape, or having your eyes too close together, or having them be too small, having no cheekbones, having a weak chin, or an overpronounced chin, or being too fat or too short, or any other thing that women might judge you for. You're not allowed to have feelings about that, because if you do, feminists will call you hostile. If you do anything to avoid women because you know they don't want to be around you, feminists will call you hostile. So avoiding your bully, taking your bully's opportunity to harass you away by being inaccessible, is hostility. So remember what I said about Miss Claire and her cluster B clusterfuck? That is a characteristic of narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
Being angry because your victim, your bullying victim, is unavailable, and then blaming that victim for being unavailable, and accusing that victim of an attack for being unavailable. Narcissism. And this is feminism. This is used to inform law and policy, right?
Well, that's exactly what a narcissist would say.
Yeah. There you go. Your government here in the United States, and probably in the UK as well, is basing decisions on what will become law and what will become policy in regard to how men and women treat each other and how the police react if somebody said they were mistreated, on the idea that if you are concerned about being mistreated by women and you respond by defending yourself, right, or distrusting them or avoiding them, then you're hostile. Does that sound reasonable to you guys?
Absolutely not. Fucking ridiculous. But then again, that's just the privilege that women have that they don't recognize.
Yeah.
I don't do this thing. You do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, police. And the rest is history.
Yeah. It goes on to say, hostile. Obviously, you're hostile if you're hostile, guys. This is very important to know. Your hostility is hostile. And domineering orientation toward women, which is thought to emerge, like domineering. So, I look at domineering and I think, all right, there are domineering men. I've met domineering men. There are domineering women too. Is it hostile femininity when women are domineering toward men? Right? Is it hostile femininity when a woman who has never been raped, who has never been threatened with rape, who has never had any experience of being assually pursued by a predator, carries a rape whistle under the assumption that somewhere out there is a man who is going to rape her, and she needs that in order to alert everybody in the neighborhood that she's being raped. Is that
Well, no,
hostility?
of course that's just nagging. That's why we have this word nagging. You'll notice when a man does it, it's not called nagging. It's called abuse. It's called all manner of dysphonisms and cacophonisms. It's only called nagging when women do it, because when a woman does it, it's just nagging, and you should just deal with it. And unless it's back in the day when apparently patriarchy was even worse, when if your wife nags you, you can be punished for being nagged by a woman, and that's totally not the case anymore. Because nowadays, if a woman nags you, you'll just get shamed for being nagged by a woman. That's totally different. We don't do it by bashing pots and pans in public anymore. We just get you arrested and divorced, and we get all your shit taken away. It's a completely different ritual, you see.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so, if a woman is insecure about men, it's not hostile masculinity. It's because men are bad, right? And if a woman is defensive, if she carries mace in her purse, or if she writes blog posts about how important it is that women are aware of any men in the vicinity, if she writes a blog post for ihollaback.org or .com or whatever it is that says, that she walked home from work and there was a man following her the entire way, and her only evidence is that he was on the same sidewalk she was, and maybe like 20 or 30 feet behind her. Even if he kept walking after she turned down her street, or she went out of her way and then turned back toward her street and he kept walking. Like, even if she did all that, this is a blog post I've read before. I'm trying to remember what exactly the woman said that had me so sad. She went out of her way. She walked down a different street and then turned a couple of times and then turned back toward her street. And when the guy didn't turn back toward her street, she assumed he'd been following her and realized that she knew he was following her and stopped. But she probably actually just went on his route, and if she'd stayed on her route, he probably would have not been on her, behind her, any longer. But when a woman writes a blog post like that defensive, distrustful, hostile attitude toward that guy, that is not considered hostile femininity, right? But when a guy suggests that if a woman flirts with him, it shouldn't be a lie, that's considered domineering orientation toward women. You owe me, or some such thing like that. No, just don't lie to him, right? That is considered an aspect of rape culture. That's considered an aspect of sexual aggression, and that is written into your law and policies that you have to deal with. And this is thought to emerge from your culture, right? If your culture values power, toughness, and dominance as masculine traits. So what was that thing about the 6, 6, and 6 again? Like what do women select for in men that is not on that list? Do women select for powerful men?
Of course.
Yeah. Do women select for tough men?
Sure.
And do women select for dominant men?
Absolutely.
So, who is to blame if men have these attitudes?
Right. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So there's a story in the news about this basketball player, Iman Shumpert, who is married to, I don't even know what she does, Tiana Taylor, but she's also, a celebrity, whatever caliber. And, so they have a couple of kids together, I think. And, they decided to get divorced. And the reason that they're getting divorced is because there was infidelity. However, there was infidelity on both sides of the marriage. Okay. But what happens as a result of that divorce? She gets $10 million. She gets 4 houses and some crazy stipend, payment a month. I think it's something like $40,000. It's insane. They both did the same thing, but she walks away with the cash and prizes.
And he gets publicly condemned for cheating on her.
Exactly.
And I've seen that with numerous relationships that broke up too. Like, they both cheat on each other. It happens pretty much simultaneously. There isn't some description of this person started first and this other person knew about it and responded with it. But women will frequently assume that her cheating was revenge cheating for his cheating.
Mm-hmm.
And I've even seen that happen in stories where the couple both were cheating on each other at the same time, and literally they didn't know each other were cheating until one of them got caught, and in the course of the argument over it, finds out the other one was also cheating. Usually with, I'm glad I was cheating on you too. Or one of them confesses and asks for forgiveness, and the other one says, well, I did it too. And that's not revenge cheating, right? That's both of them not having a very solid marriage, and both of them saying, hey, I did this thing that hurt you, and one's apologetic, and the other one is defiant and angry and using it as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens with both sexes. Both sexes do both of those things. But when women do one of them, society has compassion and sympathy and blames the man. When men do one of them, society has condemnation and anger and blames the man.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a couple of comments on that too. Our man says, even if she writes an article about how she punched a random guy in a nightclub and gets praise about it, like the blue-haired feminist did a few years ago. I remember that. And let's see, we have... It moved because there was a new comment.
Are you going to narrow that down, by the way?
There's a lot of blue-hairs out there, but I do remember that there was an article a while back where she basically wrote that she had some opinion or impression of
and then
his
she
motivations.
glassed a guy in the face, right?
Right, for some behavior, and I think I think it was glassing, it wasn't punching, and everybody praised her. Everybody clapped, right? But there's been a few articles like that where some feminist wrote that a man was present in a location where she was, and she made a bunch of assumptions about what was on his mind or what his motivations were for some action that he took that would otherwise be completely innocuous. And
then he was like, "Yeah, you're not all that and a bag of chips, baby." And she glassed him.
Yeah.
And the media was like, "Oh, she's just got this insecurity complex."
Yeah, she's not hostile. She's insecure and defensive and distrustful because men are bad.
Yeah,
she's not insecure, and an insecure person would lean into their insecurity and wonder what they're doing wrong.
Yeah,
this is a person who's so secure that if anyone even taps on the walls of her security, she fucking glasses them.
Yep.
Like, I'm so sick of people saying, "Oh, the only reason that a woman would be so violent against men is because she's so insecure." And if only she was more secure, if only she loved herself more. Baby, you just need to love yourself more, and then you wouldn't
glass men in the face
so much. Like, fuck off. Fuck all the way off. The reason these women do this is because they love themselves so fucking much.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to cure this by telling them to love themselves even more. That's only going to make it worse. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Like, I actually was involved in an incident like this as an unwilling participant. When I worked at the pharmacy I worked at when we first started Honey Badger Radio, this chick comes in. I was a shift manager, right? She comes in, she's all in a huff, and she starts talking about this dude out in the parking lot that is looking at her butt. And now here's my perspective. I'm at a cash register. I have a line of customers. They are all waiting to check out and leave. And they don't have extra time for something not related to business that they're doing in the store to take precedence over them. So she starts out, there's a guy out there in the parking lot, behaving suspiciously, and you need to do something about it. And I can see out the windows. I'm like surrounded on by windows. So I look, and the parking lot is pretty much, aside from people's vehicles, there's nobody out there except one guy, and he's digging in his truck. He's got his back turned to everything, and he's digging in his truck. And so I'm assuming that's the guy she's talking about. And I'm like, is it that guy over there? Is that the guy you're talking about? She's, yes, that guy is acting suspiciously. Well, what is he doing? Right now, it looks like he's just getting things out of his truck. Oh, no. He was staring at me. He stood at his car and watched me walk around my car and do things and then come in, and he didn't take his eyes off me the whole time that I was outside. I felt very uncomfortable. So the whole thing that she was saying was this man looked at her.
And how the hell can you even know what he's looking at, what anybody's looking at?
Well,
Jesus, unless you're within a close proximity to one another, you can be looking at anything in the background.
And that's the first thing I thought, right? Well, how do you know he's even looking at you? And I was like, well, where were you parked? That he could see you from that angle. Because I'm like confused at this point, and she's like right there, and she points to her car, and it's right in front of the entrance. So my first reaction is I'm thinking, this guy glanced at the entrance, and then started getting, because he might have been looking for his prescription. We were at a pharmacy. He might have been returning something, which actually turned out to be the case. We had sold him something that did not fully meet the description that it was advertised for, and the aspect that it didn't meet was important to his purpose for buying it. And so I ended up giving him money. I refunded him, but which would have pissed her off if she hadn't left by that time. But in any case, and I doubt he looked for more than a second. I could not find. In fact, I don't think he looked at all, because I could not find later on camera where he turned his head toward the entrance at all. So she parked in the handicap spot in front of the entrance, and she walked in her athletic garb, and by the way, runner's tights. Not and runner's tights and a sport bra.
Oh God, come on, lady.
Right. So it wasn't like, I would have stared at her for a minute if I'd have been outside, because it wasn't that warm out. No coat, nothing to keep her warm. But she may have been in a heated car, and a lot of people do that. So, but it would have definitely attracted my attention momentarily. But in any case, so she comes in and does this, right? And she makes a big deal about it, and I can see all of the other customers, male and female, are rolling their eyes at this point. And, she's talking about feeling unsafe and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, all right. You're in here and he's out there. Why don't you just wait right here until he leaves? Well, he wasn't going to leave. He was going to come into the store because he had business here. But the impression that she had tried to create was that he came there just to creep on women. And so that was her story. She didn't want to stick to it. She was very upset and suggested that I wasn't taking her seriously. And I was like, well, how seriously? Like, are we talking, you want me to call the police? What are you suggesting? Oh, no, you don't need to get the police involved. And I finally figured out after she left what she wanted me to do was walk away from the cash register and that whole line of people and go outside and tell that man he had to leave the premises because he was harassing a woman. But
And this is,
she never said that.
I'm gonna annoy a lot of people when I say this, but it's so analogous to what I'm gonna go ahead and call dog people. Why did your dog attack me? Why did your dog run up to me and start barking and start biting at me? And they go, well, it's because they can smell your fear. It's not their fault, you see, and it's not my fault. It's because you were having bad thoughts, do you see? And dogs can detect your bad thoughts. They're telepathic, you see. So it's not their fault that they attacked you, and it's not my fault. Before you say, oh, it's not the dog, it's the owner. It's that you were experiencing bad feelings, and so it's your fault that you were attacked by my dog or my woman. And I'm like, can you how do you demonstrate that? Fuck you about demonstrating that. Like, I specifically have this thing for the sake of attacking you, and if you go ahead and question that it's my fault or my captive animal's fault, then it's even more your fault. I don't think I've expressed this in the best way possible.
Well,
but
it is something that happens. I mean, what you're talking about is, yeah, people will poorly raise their dogs or their daughters. And this chick, to have this attitude, like, if I'd have acted like that, my dad probably would have dragged me out of the store and given me the lecture of my life about, assuming what other people are thinking and, being all egotistical and everything, and why the hell are you dressed like that, especially when it's this cold outside. But this chick had obviously been taught differently, right? She was more of an exhibitionist. And there's nothing wrong with being an exhibitionist if you admit you're an exhibitionist and you make it a mutual agreement between you and the people who want to see you. So you do it in the context of, for instance, going into pornography with a partner who is willing to work with you, and it's not a problem for either of you, and you're not screwing around with everything that moves, and you enjoy it, and the people who watch it enjoy it, and you have this mutually beneficial situation. Like, there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But when your exhibitionism is accompanied by narcissism or an abusive nature where you want the attention, but then you want to condemn the people who give it to you for giving it to you, then it's a problem. Then it becomes a weapon and a tool of abuse and a means of making it so that you can't have solid relationships with other people, and the people around you can't be comfortable whenever you're there. And that's what this woman did. In the end, she had a temper tantrum at everybody in the vicinity and stormed out and left, didn't buy anything, drove off, squealed her tires and all that jazz. Granted, the guy did look when she squealed her tires. But, and then I waited on that line of people. The guy brought his thing in. He made his return. And I told him what happened. I was like, I could see that you did nothing wrong, but if you see that woman somewhere, avoid her because she's trying to accuse you of things you didn't do. And then he left. And that was that. And later on, that bitch came back and complained to my manager that there was a man harassing her, openly harassing her in the parking lot. And I did nothing about it when she came to tell me about the problem. So when we went back and checked on the video and discovered that she had no contact with any person in the parking lot, didn't look around, didn't seem nervous, came in, saw the line, and then jumped in front of everybody to approach me with this allegation. And saw the manager watched how the other people and everything were reacting, And she's like, there was no way you could have handled that would have gone any better with her. But it's pretty obvious that she's lying, and you didn't do anything wrong, and I didn't get in trouble. But if the manager had been a feminist, she would have had a whole different attitude. She wasn't. She was a very down-to-earth lady, baby boomer, who probably had seen more than her fair share of women acting like this, right? And that is like, I wouldn't be surprised if this woman went back and wrote a blog post in which she was harassed like that description, and she came in to complain, and the cashier was rude to her and didn't listen to her and blamed her, and she gave some sort of brilliant lecture, and everybody clapped before she left, and then got me in trouble with my manager for failing to torpedo some guy who had done nothing wrong. Which, I'm sure she probably to this day thinks that she got me in trouble, because there was no follow-up. She didn't come back to check. She just dropped her bomb and left. And I don't think I ever saw her again the whole 2 years I was working there. So that's how women do that, right? And her insecurity, her defensiveness, her distrust, her domineering attitude and behavior, her hostility, none of that is talked about by feminists. Women who act like that, feminists don't talk about that. They talk about whether or not we believe them, right? From a feminist perspective, they would say that I invalidated this woman's experience. And looking at the camera and finding evidence that the experience didn't happen is unfair and sexist behavior. And that just because the camera doesn't show anything doesn't mean that her experience wasn't real, right? That's how feminists handle that stuff. We also had Gabriel Phelan Lucas said, when women cheat, they're usually decided the relationship's already dead. Yeah, that's true too. Women do this thing when they're ending a relationship, right? You'll see she has less stuff at your place. She started, in fact, if there's a friend you're worried about and you start seeing, like, her friend that you're worried about, a male friend that seems to be getting closer and closer, and you are also starting to see her come over less and keep fewer things at your house, and not have as much personal, intimate involvement in your as like part of your life, in your sphere of existence, and not just sex, but her shampoo's in your bathroom, and like every so often you get mail at your house for her. Like, if that stuff starts not happening anymore, like, that's a sign right there. But the other thing that she'll do is maybe she's got shampoo at his house, and maybe she started to keep some other things at his place. And by the time she leaves you, even if she has not had sex with him, she has been cheating with him for a period of time, much longer than just a few days, and she's already in a relationship with him. And they're already waiting in the wings. The guy is already waiting in the wings, and he already thinks that you have done something unforgivable to her because she's already complained to him in that manner. That is pretty much how that happens. And it's one of the reasons why it's like women think men are domineering when they don't want you to have a bunch of a bunch of guy friends, like, or when you don't want them to have they think you're domineering when you don't want their primary group of buddies to be male. It's because every single one of them is going to try to date her. And I've had that experience. Like, it's easier for me to hang out with guys. When you're young, when you're in your 20s, and most of your female, or most of your partner's friends, your female partner's friends are dudes. every single one of them is going to try to be better than you. Unless he's gay, or unless he's got a very solid relationship with another woman who he loves too much to make that mistake. And I ended up having to pare down my male friends because of that, right? To where, like, I didn't spend a lot of time with guys, and I didn't spend time with them away from my husband because I didn't want them to think I was receptive to that. And it was a challenge, It was something I didn't really believe in until I witnessed it. And it's the only guys that didn't try were guys that were in solid relationships with awesome women that I knew that they didn't want to screw that up. So there you go. But yeah, back to this. So I started looking into this, right? Those layers that I was talking about earlier. This research on this scale, this a description, I guess, this overview, the confluence model of sexual aggression. And it references these same two bits of research, Malmuth 1995 and Malmuth 1991. Just references them in reverse here. And then Smith 2015. So it goes on. Men who value cultural notions of masculinity may develop insecurities about their embodiment of masculine ideals. Right? I want to isolate that sentence. And I'm going to erase the gendered language. People who value cultural notions of identity. So, for instance, if you are a deacon at your church, let's say you're a deacon at your church, people who value cultural notions of their identity. Your identity as a deacon includes expectations for your character and expectations for how your behavior will demonstrate that. And you're under pressure to live up to those expectations because you know two things, right? People are watching you to see if they trust you to hold that position of influence. And then people are also looking to you for guidance and for cues on what they should do in similar situations to how they're seeing you enact various behavior. Let's go the other direction. Let's say, I don't know, you're a street hooker, right? If you act very, very differently than the other street hookers, wouldn't you expect people to judge you for that in your community? Right? You value the cultural notions of your identity based on what you do. If you are white or black or have a particular religion or engage in a particular profession or have a particular hobby that you're with a large group of people, say a gamer, right? If you're in a large group of gamers, you would value the gaming cultural notions of what is a gamer. And you might develop insecurities if you feel like you are not living up to that, if you're not going to get good, if you can't master some aspect of the games that you play, or you're not able to develop camaraderie with your fellow gamers. So it's only bad if men who value cultural notions of their masculine identity are insecure about whether they are living up to people's expectations of what makes them a man. Then it goes on, this could evoke behaviors that explicitly demonstrate masculine traits, particularly in contexts of tenuous or threatened masculine identity. So, here they are condemning again. If you are worried that people will think that you're not masculine, and so you act like a man, that's apparently dangerous. Within sexual relationships, consolidation of power, feelings of dominance, and perceptions of control may derive from sexual aggression. Additionally, aversive home environments, such as those that encompass child maltreatment or interparental violence, may produce chronic feelings of shame or inadequacy, attachment difficulties, or aid the development of psychopathic personality traits in children. And it jumps from that to this. So it doesn't really give you a description of the issue with wanting to identify as a man and wanting to demonstrate that you are a man. It just makes the association by jumping to this other side of it might be because, you were abused as a child. You might feel a need to be a man because you were abused as a child. You might feel a need to be a man because you're a psychopath. You might feel a need to be a man because you're ashamed and feeling inadequate. And therefore, you need this dominance, control, and power. These distal factors can set men on a trajectory to develop enduring cognitive schemas and destructive patterns of behavior that are associated with hostile forms of masculinity. So what did they do? They sort of couched in the middle of all this to sort of cover it in ideas that men are bad. The fact that the things that they are upset about might be caused by child abuse. Who abuses children the most?
Women.
Mm-hmm. And historically, HHS data shows this. HHS data shows that in household abuse, women perpetrate most of the time. When it's really egregious, when it leads to the death of the child, about 70% of parents acting without the other parent are mothers. So this sort of sets...
The counter argument is, well, men abuse women, and so women abuse children. Well, no, not necessarily. And none of this stops women from abusing men. This is something men and children have in common. I know it's weird to suggest that there's anything men and children have in common, but they do, just as much as women and girls have something in common. Men and boys have something in common, and largely it's that men used to be boys, and boys, much like girls, were raised largely by women. Not just now, not just 100 years ago, but 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. Women have been the primary raisers, for want of a better aged noun, of children, be they girls or boys. And the idea that boys can be raised by women for the first 10 years of their lives, and this has no effect on the rest of their lives? Need I remind you of what Aristotle understood since 3,000 years ago? Give me the boy until the age of 10 and I will give you the man. Well, it's women who have been given the boy until the age of 10. For almost all, dare I say all, of ascertainable human history, the boys have been given to the women until the age of 10. I don't know how Aristotle missed this, but apparently he did.
Yeah.
Unless we're missing something about how the ancient Greeks raised their children. But as far as I know, children have been raised by women for, I mean, literally all of human history. And given the prospect that that boys retain everything they learned from that early age, and that they were raised by women, they were raised to respect women. I know that's
well, they were raised
mental.
to venerate women.
Exactly. I know this sounds insane, not just to feminists, but to traditionalists, because even traditionalists will insist that children are raised by women to at least the age of puberty and whatnot, and yet their minds are blown by the idea that men become unassailably gynocentric by the age of puberty. And you might ask, well, what can we possibly do to stop this from happening? Gee, I don't know. Maybe we should let men have at least an equal say in raising their children, and maybe they might not grow up to be so gynocentric. Mental, I know. It's a mental idea. How could this possibly be ascertained or gone through? Yeah, maybe we should let men raise their children. And I know you're going to go, well, men don't want to raise their children. No, but by the age of 10, they definitely do. I mean, men don't like raising babies.
Well, it depends on the man, because my dad really got into it.
I know that too is something of a stereotype, that women know what to do with babies and men don't.
In fact, it's feminist bullshit.
To some degree, men aren't gonna fucking stab their babies and fucking throw them off a fucking cliff. Men also understand, that you're supposed to be as tender as possible with a baby. But it's to some degree the stereotype is true, that when a baby is at its most helpless, women are better at understanding that. That's why girls love dolls, and boys love machines. That's why a boy will, even at the earliest of age, will be more obsessed with a clock face than a doll face, and girls will be more obsessed with a doll face than a clock face. But at some age, at an even earlier age than the stereotype would suggest, men do get quite enamored by their children, and it's certainly towards the age of puberty that men become more centered on what their children are becoming, because men want to teach their children how to become independent, how to teach their children to figure out how to live life for themselves. And that sounds contradictory, because the idea of empowering a child is sort of contradictory, because you can't empower someone by giving them power. The idea of empowering means encouraging a child to discover their own power, and that seems to be what men are more interested in. They're more interested in teaching a child to discover their own power. Certainly they're boys. I mean, it's very difficult to get through to a man that you can even do this with your daughters. You can even encourage your daughters to discover their own power. And that's not the same as empowering. Empowering is just this buzzword that means shielding them from the harshness of the world. But no, men, and by men I mean fathers, have this drive to teach their children that that the world will throw all kinds of unpredictable forces upon you, and at some point in your life, it's up to no one but you to face those powers with your own resourcefulness. And that's an important difference between mothers and fathers, that men realize this from a very early age, and yeah, it's not something that you should teach to babies because babies don't understand this. Like toddlers haven't developed the theory of mind necessary to recognize that that you have your own resources, that you have your own way of dealing with these things. But this is why, traditionally, for all of human history, children have been raised by their mothers until a certain age, and what that certain age is has fluctuated over the years. But at some point, maybe at, let's say, 10 years old, on average, children are handed over from their mothers to their fathers, so that they can understand that there's a harsh world out there, and you need to understand that harsh world.
So there's a few things that we should actually clarify here, because there are different cultural histories that don't necessarily follow that traditional idea. And in fact, most cultures throughout history prior to the industrial age did not separate parenting between mothers and fathers. Men were not gone from the home all day necessarily, and women were not in the home all day. The idea that, you get up in the morning and you leave and you don't come back until after a day's work is done and your family isn't involved and all that is relatively new. And prior to that, you had a significant portion of the world where each family pretty much had their own, needed their own little farm. As areas became more urbanized, that changed. But you had, if they didn't have their own little farm, they had their own business, which was usually either in their home or in an area where the family would all work together. And in the early part of the industrial age, that is, that's why children ended up working in factories and coal mines and stuff, because prior to the industrial age, if the whole family ran a farm, the children worked on a farm. If the whole family ran a bakery, the children worked in a bakery. If the whole family ran a business shoeing horses, the children worked in a barn. Right? If they raised horses, the children worked in a barn. If they did any specific thing, the children learned it, and the wife was involved. Right? It was only until we started shaping our culture as human beings in various nations around urbanizing ourselves, creating a close-knit set of human habitations that didn't leave room for a whole home business or a whole home farm, that changed. And so fathers had involvement with their children from birth, and it was consistent and regular. Fathers are different from mothers. Mothers encourage sense of security, and they encourage the use of existing resources like, the mother's caregiving and the mother's love. Fathers encourage discovery learning. And discovery learning can be anything from, I tasted something and I didn't like it, so I'm not going to eat it again, to I stuck my foot in hot coals and I got burned, so I'm not going to do that again, to, hey, here's how this works and how I can use it. And my dad did that with me when I was a kid. In regard to, I think I've told the rattle story a billion times, but this goes back to infancy. I had a rattle that had a handle that was a loop it was plastic, so it was solid. It wasn't flexible.
I could have sworn you were going to tell
Mike?
You're going to tell the story about you walking on hot coals.
No. That one my dad used that as a discovery learning moment too, right? But
well, I haven't heard the one about the rattle.
Well, you're gonna hear it. So I had this. I even remember it was this baby blue rattle, and it was made, for a kid's fingers to fit through the loop to make it easier for a child to hold on to, an infant to hold on to. And I also had this little toy that was, it was a Christmas tree that was made out of concentric rings of wood that sat on a wood platform that had a pole that went up through the middle, and they were, consecutively smaller, and they were different colors, something that somebody might make in a wood shop, and then at the top was a red ball that fit to hold, sort of be the decoration at the top of the Christmas tree, and hold the other concentric circles down. And it was actually, we used it as a Christmas decoration when I was older. But that ball at the top of the Christmas tree fit exactly, like tightly, but exactly inside the ring of that rattle, the handle. And I could see that by looking at it. I could tell. I just looked at the hole, looked at the ball, was like, that would fit in there perfectly. I could probably put it through there if I wanted to, but I can put it in there and have it be in there. And knowing that I could do that, I wanted to. Immediately, like I had to prove to myself, yes, I'm right about this. I want to do this. So I started messing with it, but I was so young that I had not developed the hand coordination yet to be able to hold the rattle and the ball and apply the amount of direct pressure it took to get it in there and have it not pop all the way through or slide out of my hands and I was working at it. I was getting really frustrated, and every time I would screw it up or it would go through instead of stopping where I wanted it, or all I would started fussing and stomping my feet and pounding my fists on the floor and everything. My dad sees that. So initially he thought, oh, I can fix this for her, right? So he put the ball in the hole and handed it back to me. Well, that wasn't what I wanted, and I wanted to do it my own self. It's how this works, right? So I lost it. I went ballistic. Little baby, throwing a temper tantrum like little babies do. So he took it back out, handed it back to me. Okay, let's see what's going to happen. Well, I had seen how he did it, so my determination doubled, and eventually I did it myself, and I was very happy about it. And he told that story later on in regard to figuring out what kind of person I was and what kind of person I was going to be and how to help me develop. That was an important characteristic, that determination, that need to independently achieve things and not have them done for me. And stuff like that. That he then incorporated that into his promotion of discovery learning in my life, in that he gave me things to do, puzzles to solve, toys to play with that were a little more complicated than were intended for my age. Nothing I was going to choke on, but enough that it might be a little frustrating for me when I first start playing with it until I get it figured out and make it work, and then I would get that sense of achievement, and I also would learn in the process some bit of physics or some bit of thing that you would intuitively understand. Gravity works. Items that don't fit into spaces, it turned one direction might fit into that space if you turn it a different direction. Things like that, not formulas and stuff. That's how fathers do things. My mother would have been flummoxed by the whole idea of the rattle. She would have been very frustrated with my getting upset that she had solved the problem, and she would have been frustrated by my continued efforts at solving it myself after I had seen it solved, even though she had the same personality I did. And I know that because I had to fight that tendency with my kid when we brought home a Bionicle, and I originally wasn't going to buy it because it was for kids like 3 or 4 years older than my kid. And I'm like, I don't want him to get frustrated. My dad was like, let him try it. If he has difficulty with it, let him face the challenge and step in if he needs support. And so I bought it, brought it home, And I was like, wait, I gotta go to the bathroom. I'll be right back, and then we can build this together. I came back out, and he'd already done it. And he did it because the bionicle directions, they didn't have words. He couldn't read yet. They just had pictures. And this picture showed this item goes in this location and that item, so it's just basically putting shapes together, right? And I thought, I didn't get a chance to do it with him. I was upset for a minute. And I realized that he was incredibly happy to show me that he could do it by himself. And it took everything to be like, this isn't about me. Nothing was taken away from me. He just had a moment of independence that has to be fostered. And I had to be careful about stuff like that, because when my son was little, when he was under 5, we didn't have the circumstances where my husband and I lived together all the time. Right? We had very bad economic circumstances, and that was my fault. And so I had to not undermine the types of things that he did when he was there, because he wasn't going to be present to stop me. And so my dad kind of stepped in and filled the "don't let mommy screw this up" role. And he did that with a lot of stories about how he parented when I was a kid. I didn't have to be mom and dad. I just had to be the kind of mom that understood how to not undermine dad. And so that's kind of father involvement during the early years. Like, historically, was much more common than people think. And even in modern times, there is a lot that was a lot of what people believe is stereotypical. Dads come home from work and they engage with their kids. And they engage with their kids in ways that are different than the ways that mom engaged with the kids, right? Moms engage in like very coddling ways. Dads engage in very independence encouraging ways. And so there's this research that I have cited on a regular basis. Let me see if I can move this to the window that we're using so you can see it. The Father Involvement Research Alliance did this ages ago, the effects of father involvement, and it explains, involvement in early childhood, involvement measured as time spent together, quality of father-child relationship, mother's role in father involvement. Every MRA should read this. There's quite a bit that has been demonstrated. I don't know if... Yeah, there's a lot that's in paragraphs here that explains like different types of support. Kids with involved fathers from infancy start demonstrating benefits of father involvement. Infants of highly involved fathers, as measured by amount of interaction, including higher levels of play and caregiving activities, are more cognitively competent at 6 months and score higher on the Bailey scales of infant development, which those can be used to determine if your child needs extra support, if your child has special needs intellectually. But by 1 year, so we're talking way before 10, by 1 year, they continue to have higher cognitive functioning, are better problem solvers as toddlers, and have higher IQs by the age of 3. Right? When compared with fathers talk with toddlers is characterized by more WH questions. Right? Who, what, where, when, why, and, of course, how. Which requires children to assume more communicative responsibility in the interaction. There's another thing that's different between mothers and fathers. Right? Mothers, oh, you got a little boo-boo, let me kiss and make it better. Here. And did you have a tummy ache? Dads will be more like, okay, what hurts? And a kid is not being treated like they need to be coddled in having this discussion. They're just being asked a question. And Do you want a Band-Aid? I can put a Band-Aid on that. And Dad will put the Band-Aid on just like Mom puts the Band-Aid on, but he doesn't talk about putting the Band-Aid on just like Mom puts the Band-Aid on. And kids will prefer being coddled. Most people like to feel others' compassion for them. Most people like to experience that, right? It's not that dads don't have compassion. It's that was an exchange where the dad needed information. And so the kid learns that you can treat your wound. You can deal with an issue that you're experiencing without getting babied. And you still get the Band-Aid. You still feel better. You still have the medication that goes on the cut. And you're still being taken care of. It doesn't have to be baby talk. A lot of times guys, little boys, are more likely to embrace not being babied. And they develop a preference that maybe their mom not do that in front of other people. And girls don't pick up on that. Right? They'll still want to be babied. They still want... In fact, it becomes not about the nail over time. And when they hit adulthood and they have something to complain about, they still want to be babied. But that's why they get mad at men and why they develop daddy issues, right? But kids have involved fathers because of those differences in communication. They talk more. They use more diverse vocabulary. They get people to understand them better because of that. And they speak more eloquently. They have longer utterances when interacting with their fathers when they're little. And this continues through elementary school, through secondary school, through post-secondary school, into their relationships with their partners, and so on. What starts during the tender years, when the father is allowed to do his type of nurturing without maternal interference, continues to benefit the child throughout the child's entire life. So,
yeah, and the question you need to ask yourself is, when has it gone too far? Like, there's the ways fathers deal with things, and there's the ways mothers deal with things, and yet they're both important. Like, it's important for a child to have a mothering instinct and a fathering instinct, but you have to ask yourself when it's gone too far. And the feminist world that has inflicted our educational institutions has been telling children for a long ass time, like, just put a Band-Aid over it, like,
yeah.
forever. And if fathers have had any influence, they would be saying, fuck the Band-Aid, just go at that and do shit for yourself. And you have to ask yourself, when has the mothering instinct gone too far? And here in the West, we seem to have been under the influence of the mother instinct for a long time. Like, no one ever says, just get it out there and rub some dirt into it. All anyone can say is put a Band-Aid over it. It doesn't matter that you're going to get raped and murdered by whoever it is. Just put a Band-Aid over it.
Yeah.
Like, at what point do you say the mothering instinct has gone a bit too far and the fathering instinct has not been allowed to go even to its to level 1 of its instinct? And this is like, I've been trying to get through to normies for the last 20 years of this endeavor of ours, and it's really difficult to get through to, I don't know what you call them, normies who have been convinced that the leftist frame of mind is the way to go. Normies who have been listening to the TV for some time. And the question you really need to ask is, okay, when has it gone too far? Like, I get it. You want the mothering instinct be instilled into people, but when has it gone too far? I get it. You want the fathering instinct to be pushed out of people's instincts, but when has it gone too far? I get it. You want infinite immigrants.
But when has it gone too far?
When has it gone too far?
Yeah.
And they don't have any answer. Like, their answer is no. There's no such thing as too far. And then you have to just go, well, then you're an extremist. Like, I know you call me an extremist because I'm trying to introduce like some pushback on your extremism, and you consider that too far. Like the idea that we should maybe deport all of these illegals, and you think that's too far. Okay, but how many immigrants is too far? How many fatherless families is too far? And they have no answer. They're just like, no, we don't need fathers, and we need infinite immigrants. None of this is too far. And at that point, you just have to go, well, you're an extremist. That's exactly what extremism is, because you have no concept of what is too far. And so we can't have this argument, because you have no conception of what is too far. And so we can't have this argument anymore. And I just hope we can get along with each other when it comes to anything. And then you just have to try and work this out until it becomes so impossible to even live together that you just have to say, okay, we've been going along with this concept of yours where you have no conception of what is too far, before we go, okay, we've been living with your unassailable extremism for this long that I'm like, what the fuck do we even do anymore?
Yeah.
What even works anymore when you have no concept of what is too far to the, dare I say, left? I don't even know how I describe this, because we're dealing with normies who think that the extreme left is the sensible center, and they just keep going, no, we just need to keep going in this direction, because there's no such thing as too far in this direction. And I'm like, oh fuck me, what? I don't know how I even argue with you when you have no conception of what is too far. You keep calling me the extremist, but you have no conception of what is too far in the opposite direction of what you call extremist. So, fuck me, what do we do? What do we do? And I don't fucking even know anymore.
Well, for one thing, we know we've gone too far when we start developing the idea that people can replace other people who are dramatically different from them in ways that make their part in a communal effort, like raising a child or being involved in a community, essential in a way that is different than the replacer. So, for instance, the feminist idea that women, single mothers, can do it all. I have to be the mother and the father. No, you can't do that. You don't have the capability. It doesn't exist. You are not the mother and the father. You might be, it's possible for you to be, a stellar mother, so stellar that you mitigate some of the effects of loss of father involvement. But you can never be the same as having two parents. There is no pathway a woman can take that can make her the same as a child growing up with both mother and father. And the same is true if you take the mother out of the picture and the child is only raised by the father. Right? And a good way of explaining this is to tell you the two different ways my husband and I reacted to childhood temper tantrums as parents, right? And my son wanted the big candy bar at the grocery store. They had those candy bars that were like if you took, 3 or 4 or 6, I guess, Hershey bars, regular size Hershey bars, and you put them all together in a line. They had a candy bar that was a big chunk of chocolate like that. It was like a pound. And they only sold them around certain holidays. And, you were supposed to break them up and share with people. And he saw that, it was like as big as his whole belly, and he wanted it. And I offered to let him get, we'll get this bag of little kid-sized candy bars, and you can have a candy bar that won't give you a tummy ache after supper, No, he was really upset, little kid, very not ready to behave in public. And so he did the spaghetti-limbed angry kid dance with the whole Song of His People. I want a big candy bar. And I looked at him, and there's, of course, people looking at him. And I started stomping my feet and being spaghetti-limbed and singing the Song of My People. No, you can't have the big candy bar. And he just stopped. And he looked up at me and he goes, Mom, don't do that. Because, of course, everybody's staring at me. It's like, why shouldn't I do that? You did it. Mom, that's embarrassing. It's like, well, why isn't it embarrassing when you did it? You look the same doing it as I do. And this realization crosses his face. Oh my gosh, I look like that. I'm never doing this again. All right. My husband, I was with him when one of the gals was having one of their little early meltdowns. And she starts, she's been with Mom exclusively for a couple of months because Mom wouldn't let her see Dad. And she didn't get something she wanted, and she starts, hemming and hawing and acting like she's going to throw a fit. Granted, she's a few years older than this situation with my son. But he just looks at her, makes eye contact so that he knows that she's paying attention to him. And he said, "You cut that out." That stopped it immediately. No problem. And you could tell that at some point in their history, he had established an authoritative response to it, not an explanation of, this is what other people see when you do this. And it's important for that authoritative response to exist. And it's important for that authoritative relationship to exist between fathers and their children. Because there are times when the child is going to do something that is not anywhere near as harmless as a temper tantrum. A temper tantrum is something that, sucks to experience it and then it's over, right? Unless, you're over 18 and it involves destruction of property or hitting somebody, and then all of a sudden you go to jail. Right? Or, you bring home a 23-year-old truck driver named Tiny when you're 17, and your father has to inform him that you're not 21. You discover that he really isn't interested anymore. It's one of those situations that moms don't have a handle on the way that fathers do. It is important for kids to understand their image in the world, but it's not the only thing that should guide their behavior. They should have a recognition. There is always going to be some degree of authority or power that they don't have that can be enforced upon them that they are going to have to respect. And it doesn't matter whether it's in terms of how they learn to respect and react to it. It doesn't matter whether it's an actual authority, a government or something like that, whether it's gravity works, so you better respect that it's going to happen, or whether it's your community is going to react a certain way, regardless of what you think, if you violate very strongly held community norms. Kids have to have that understanding, or they get themselves into circumstances where they are going to face consequences regardless of whether it's right or wrong for those consequences to be imposed upon them.
All we can do is explosions.
Yeah.
And a woman can provide a wealth of high-pitched explosions. Like those kind of paper-based fireworks that we have at Halloween, the ones that go bah, 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 bah. But a man can provide an explosion with so much bass that it actually rocks the room, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's an unfortunate eventuality of life. But yeah, men have deeper voices than women, and children respond to deep, bassy explosions for no logical reason. Just bassy explosions affect everyone more than trebly explosions, and it just so happens men have deeper voices. I mean, not all, well,
there's
literally all.
There's more to it than that. Like, there's a posture. There's the eye contact thing matters too, and there is also a history of moms will do this thing, right? You're gonna be in trouble. I'm gonna ground you, or moms will get out the motorcycle. A dad will be like, no. And mom will be like, no, 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 no. If you have to say it a bunch of times and not more than once, you're not saying it effectively.
This is why you should be sparing with the word no when it comes to. I realize this is an arrogant thing for me to say because I've never had children, but and the more you say any sound to a child, the more deconditioned they become to it. So you have to be very sparing with the word no.
There's a couple things with no. No has to always mean what you're saying. It has to be understood that it has authority behind it. And it cannot just be your default answer to everything you don't want to think about. Because the minute it is your default answer to everything you don't want to think about, it creates a reason for your child to push back. And it's not bad if your child tries to negotiate when you say no. Like, there are times when, especially moms, right? Mom is asked, can I want, whatever. And the thing that follows that is something that involves mom having to do some work. And she's tired, she doesn't want to do that work, and she'll say no. If the kid negotiates a way to mitigate that work or offer a value for that work, mom should consider a yes in that circumstance. If the reason for not saying yes before wasn't because if the kid gets the thing the kid is asking for, it's going to do harm to the kid or put the kid at risk, then consider and teach the kid to negotiate by bringing back a counteroffer and hashing out the details. And then when you make an agreement, you live up to your end of that agreement and you hold the child to his end of that agreement. That's what dads do.
Oh, yes.
A lot of times, kids will start attempting a thing. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to climb this tree. I'm going to build this huge snow fort. And, whatever it is, mom puts the kibosh to it because maybe the snow fort is in a bad location. You can't put that in front of the door, right? We have to be able to get in and out of the house. But instead of telling the child, you can't put that in front of the door, we have to be able to get in and out of the house like dad. Let's maybe do it over here like dad would. A lot of moms will say, stop doing that. And that's the end of the story. Or instead of being present and making sure that if the child falls out of the tree his first time climbing, you don't allow him to get too badly hurt, like Dad would. Mom freaks out, "Get down from there! Oh my God, what are you going to do? You're going to break your arm!" And the child is afraid to climb trees from now on.
Or at some point, your kid is going to stick a fork into the electric socket. And when you shout no, you better make sure that it's something the kid hasn't heard very often. Because if it's something you shout every time your kid plays Nintendo, then the kid's just going to think, no is just this noise that I hear every now and again. It doesn't really mean anything. But if you don't often say no, then as the moment you shout no when they put a fork in the plug socket, they're going to go, oh, shit, what the fuck is that? And they're going to stop doing what they're doing.
Yep. Yeah, Richard Pierre points out, I didn't try to negotiate before I tried to steal my brother from my mother. That is true. It's my baby. On the other hand, my mom wasn't far enough away that was going to work either. The minute I started trying to pick him up by myself, she was right there. You're not strong enough to do that. Let's sit on the couch and you can hold him in your lap. But wait until you're older to try to pick up a baby. And that was kind of an interesting exchange, because I was like, oh shit, I've been caught. And then she let me hold the baby anyway. But then we did have to have the discussion that no, this is my baby, he's your brother. And your relationship is brother and sister, not mother and child. So don't treat him like he's your baby. It was a very hard thing for me our whole life when he was little, because he was such a cute little kid. But yeah. That's basically, you can't discount the vital importance of fathers in a child's life. And to bring it back to the main discussion, we mentioned the development of personality traits in children, right? And they say psychopathic because they're talking about various things, child maltreatment, interparental violence, and so on, right? These things happen when parents do not pick out good partners, and they don't raise the child together, or they don't work well together and they create a hostile living environment for the child. Most abused children are in single mother homes, right? Kids that see interparental violence are most often in homes where the violence takes place between the parents, going both ways, and the majority of that violence is female initiated. Most of the kids that grow up in homes where the interparental violence only goes one way are witnessing mommy attacking daddy, and not the other way around. That feminists talk about this like it's all daddy beating on mommy after he comes home drunk from the bar or shit like that, which is, it's like 30% of one-way violence, which is the minority of violence in relationships, not the majority. It's usually mommy starting an argument over something, escalating to pushing and shoving and chest poking and stuff like that, or, waking him up by pouring boiling water on him while he's laying on the couch trying to sleep. So, and quite often it's not just dad that she assaults, it's the kids too. So it's not as cut and dried as feminists make it out to be. But this idea of hostile masculinity actually comes from an old piece of feminist writing masquerading as research called the Confluence Mediational Model of Sexual Aggression. And this is headed up by this Neil M. Malamuth. That was this was done in 1991, and the first thing he does in it is cite himself, right? Inspired by Malamuth and Barabi's 1984 pioneering theoretical perspective on a multifactorial approach to conceptualizing sexual aggression, which sounds like a mouthful of gobbledygook. But what it says there is, in 1994, feminists made up the idea, a theoretical perspective, an idea, that sexual aggression is actually a result of a spectrum of causes all converging in one person to affect their behavior. And it's possible. It's possible that they were correct on that, and it's possible that that was logical and rational and not necessarily intended to demonize men. But I'm not going to hold my breath, right? So it goes on to explain that the first model was published at that point. That was the original description of it. Kind of like if I were going to explain to you how the origins of the term accountability gap in men's rights activism, and if I was going to, I'm not going to say that I'm the first person that ever talked about it. I think I might be the first person that ever called it that label. But the men's rights movement has been talking about it for a century. I would go back to Bax, Ernest Belfort Bax, the writings of Ernest Belfort Bax, and the way that he described differences in expectations for personal accountability between men and women. And if I would then go forward and say that the term itself, the first use I'm aware of the term itself is when I described it in response to the wage gap myth being perpetuated by feminists and how they went from describing women's activities in the workplace as equal to men. When that was disproved, they're like, well, what about housework? And I'm like, housework is something you do for yourself at home. Your employer doesn't owe you anything for that. They couldn't even take accountability for being wrong about that gap. And that gap demonstrates that women are less accountable for their family finances than men are. But, so that's where I kind of, like, this thing that I've been reading about and seeing discussed, all these places that MRAs have been talking about for a century, we should call it the accountability gap. Because that's basically what it is. And that's where the term came from. But the concept was definitely not something that I came up with. Right? So, Marshall and Barbie's pioneering, it's not a self-citation there. This is the first self-citation here. And this one's interesting. But Marshall and Barbie's thing, that isn't necessarily the first iteration of the idea that sexual violence, like sex crime commission, that its causes might be a spectrum of influences in an individual's life. That has been discussed in regard to perpetration of violent crimes since at least the early 60s, if not prior to that. That a kid who grows up without a dad, for instance, is more likely to become a perpetrator of violent crime. That a kid who grows up in a violent environment might have that issue. That a kid who has some sort of childhood mental health condition that doesn't get treated might have that issue. And certain personality characteristics make individuals vulnerable to developing like patterns of selfishness that would make them think it's justified to steal or something like that. Like, those things were all talked about for ages before feminists came along and said, oh, we're going to apply this to sex crimes and limit it to men. So the original confluence model of sexual aggression, I don't know if I can highlight this. It's not going to let me do that. All right. Confluence model of sexual aggression was the first published model to present an empirical framework for this approach, recognizing that it wasn't just one thing that caused somebody to become a criminal. Specifically when it's men committing sexual aggression. And then it gives the citations, and the second citation is Malamuth, Saklowski, Koss. and tanka. So people should recognize Kos. Y'all recognize Kos? We're gonna probably stop with this, but just Mike and Lauren, do you recognize that name? You're both muted. You gotta unmute.
I definitely recommend. What is wrong with me? Remember that name? Yes. Mary Kos.
Mary P. Kos.
Mm-hmm.
Mary P. Kos is the woman who defined her. I want to say it was 1993. So just a couple of years later, after this 1991 thing, she wrote that it's not right to call it rape when a man experiences forced sex and a woman is the perpetrator. And she didn't provide any reasons. Right? There was no reason at all. Just we shouldn't also call it rape when a woman forces sex on a man against his will.
Because reasons.
Yep.
Just reasons. Reasons are the reasons.
So this is who helped come up with this confluence model. And then it's been used for other work, support for other work. The empirical framework also led to some theoretical developments designed to explain the reasons for the particular characteristics of sexual aggressors. Like sexual aggressors, when you actually examine the character, the personality traits, the thought patterns and behaviors of sexual aggressors, one of the things you find out with the ones that are male is they belong to that extreme minority of the male population that is criminally violent overall. The ones that are more likely to mug you, to get money, to do something that they want to do instead of getting a job. Right? That's the overwhelming majority among male sexual violence perpetrators. There are other instances, other situations. There are guys that commit crimes of force while they're drunk, or otherwise impaired, because their judgment is impaired, and
you have to wonder.
They're often the one-time perpetrators, but that other group does about 96%, if I remember the research, of sexual perpetration.
Is this just a Western problem that only appeared because of Mary Kos? And then you have to wonder if this is a problem that appeared in the third world, not because of a Mary Kos, but because of a general consensus that appeared in the East and the Middle East and the Southern East, which we'll go ahead and call Africa, and so a whole bunch of what the Kos outlook resulted in was a bunch of men who were convinced that if they were sexually assaulted, it was their fault. And so if they grow up thinking that there's nothing wrong with sexual assault, and they go on a bunch of women, well, I mean, I guess you can blame them for that in some way because everyone's responsible for their own actions. But if you convince a country full of men that if they were sexually assaulted, then it was their fault, then is it any wonder that they grow up thinking sexual assault is okay? And then you go on to wonder, like I said, is this just a Western problem? How many countries out there are full of men who were already long since convinced that if they were sexually assaulted by women, then it's perfectly okay for them to sexually assault anyone, especially women, what with them being heterosexual males. And so there's a whole bunch of countries out there who don't even have a marriage, but they've nevertheless been convinced that if they were subjected to sexual assault, that they can therefore go on to commit sexual assault. And so they do in their countries. And then their countries get sick of them doing that, and so they send them away to whatever country will take them. And then you get the kind of problems that we in the West are experiencing.
What's
Like,
really
as much as we've been, as much as the men in the West have been demoralized into making sure they never approach women. Don't you dare ever approach women for any reason, even if you just want to give them flowers and chocolates, and lavish them with perfectly chivalric attention. But you've been demoralized into only doing it in the most romantic possible terms. Other countries haven't had this development. Other countries, such as in the Middle East and most of Africa and indeed India, have never had this chivalric code drilled into them. They've just been raped by women for their whole lives, because again, those women have never been taught that it's wrong to rape boys. But because there's such a glut of these men in all these countries who've been raped by women and not been taught that it's wrong to rape people, they go on to do all this shit, and so their countries eject them from those countries and they send them in the direction of the West. And so they go to the West and they take these philosophies with them, whereupon the countries they land in continue to blame their own native men for these outlooks, and this ideology multiplies, where men get raped by women. I mean, boys get raped by women, and then they grow up to be men who have no sense of boundaries, and so they rape and get away with, or they sexually harass women, any women they can get away with, and it all gets blamed on the native men who have already been demoralized into not doing that. I mean, I should summarize what I mean. Women rape boys everywhere, all over the world, and so they either escape to other countries or they are pushed away into other countries, where they can act out these instincts they've developed as a result of being raped by women.
yeah.
And so they have no boundaries when it comes to women, and so the cycle continues where they are not held accountable for the habits that have been drilled into them as a result of being raped by women, and they're not. It doesn't. It's never drilled into them that they shouldn't do this. It's only ever drilled into the native men who have already long since been demoralized into never approaching women whatsoever.
It's more insidious. They all had Mary Koss.
Yeah, everyone had a Mary Koss.
No, they all had Mary Koss. It's USAIDs.
We have a Mary Koss. They were just raped by nameless women. We were raped by Mary Koss. The world has been raped by women.
Mary Koss has been exported all over the world by the United States. Every country has been influenced. Every culture, every country's law and policy has been influenced by the work of this woman who wrote that it's not rape when a woman forces unwanted sex on a man or a boy.
I think it might be naive to assume it started with Mary Koss.
No, it didn't start with Mary Koss, but it is a cultural influence, and it is a factor in the lack of compassion in modern society, even in nations where that lack of compassion has some historical roots. Right? The United States had the opportunity, if we were going to export something like that, we had the opportunity in that MRAs have existed for a century and have been objecting to this stuff for a century. That there were debates among feminists, that there was another school of thought besides the Mary Koss gender-based violence school of thought. Right? The United States had the opportunity to go the other direction and view what feminists have gendered through the lens of human rights are every human's rights, and therefore the right to bodily autonomy and freedom from being imposed upon is not just a woman's right, it's a man's right as well. That if we were going to export ideas about sexual intimacy versus sexual violence, that would be our guide. And our officials within our bureaucracy chose to promote the Koss school, the gendered model, the differentiating between human rights applications for women and human rights applications for men model, with the idea that men have a lower set of human rights that doesn't include bodily autonomy and that doesn't include freedom from being imposed upon, whereas women have a higher set that not only includes their bodily autonomy and their right to not be imposed upon, but also a right of imposition. And as a result, everywhere that this problem existed as a subculture within the overall culture, instead of helping to eliminate or solve it, exports from the United States in the form of cultural influence exacerbated it. So it would be like if you came along and you saw there was a small fire and you said, oh, let's douse this. And instead of, dousing it by dumping water on it, you had a nice little spray of gasoline. So it didn't get a chance to, snuff it out, and it provided fuel.
I'm leaving some room for the possibility Mary Koss was the water and the gasoline, and that it's been going on for thousands of years.
Yeah, Koss wasn't the water. Koss was the gasoline. There were feminists that were pursuing the idea that sexual violence is largely caused by childhood traumas that happen to both sexes and need to be treated in both sexes, and that there's a way to break the cycle of violence. And Koss was like, nope, men do this to women as part of patriarchal domination, and we have to ignore it when women do it to men. And the result of this, basically, is, and I wrote about this in one of my old articles, U.S. incarcerated boys report a high rate of exploitation by female staff while in custody. Because this is kind of a closed environment which gives us a lot of information about what happens when boys are sexually abused by women. 95% of staff-perpetrated sexual abuse in those facilities is done by women, even though they're less than half of the faculty. And so about halfway down the article, I cited a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1998 by William C. Holmes, who has a whole bunch of letters behind his name. He's a doctor and several other things, and Gail B. Slapp, also a doctor. Sexual abuse of boys, definition, prevalence, correlates, sequelae, and management. And among the things that they discovered are changes in character, changes in personality traits when boys are sexually abused during their youth. And this doesn't specifically happen only when women do it. It's if they're abused by a man, this happens. If they're abused by a woman, this happens. Right? If they're abused by another kid, this happens. And that does happen. Kids who are sexually abused get confused and become aggressive, and they do sexually abuse other kids. So it's not universal, but it does happen. It is one of the consequences. And among the range of issues indicating trauma was the fact that victims experienced greater difficulty controlling sexual feelings. They were hypersexual. They were more likely to engage in high-risk sexual behaviors like unprotected sex, prostitution, promiscuity. They had an increased rate of STIs, partner pregnancy. They had double the rate of HIV infection. And this was when studying HIV infection was fairly new as well. The researchers also found an increased rate of PTSD, anxiety disorders, and then here's where it gets to disorders that can exacerbate any tendencies that can lead to criminal behaviors. Borderline personality disorder, paranoia, dissociation, anger, aggressive behavior. These are all things that, if that's already present and this makes it worse, and it is already leading someone down the wrong path, this puts the second foot on that path. Right? They had varying degrees of increased drug and alcohol abuse, up to 44 times as much. They could become 44 times more likely and even have an earlier start down that path, right? So substances that can affect your decision-making capabilities, your judgment, they're more likely to use those. They experience twice the rate of low self-esteem, behavioral problems, antisocial personality disorder, 3 times more likely to have bulimia, where their self-esteem is so badly affected that they become anorexic and they throw up to try to control their weight. And then they're up to 5 times more likely to report sexually related problems, including sexual dysfunction, 4 times as likely as others to experience major depression, up to 14 times more likely to attempt suicide. And so it's not just harming others, it's also self-harm. But then I went on, I talked about a lot of the different things that their main impact is on the victim, right? But there is impact on the victim that can affect how the victim's behavior, the victim's later choices will impact other people. While it's not clear the rate to which this happens, because you can be terribly abused as a child and grow up and never commit a crime. Never do anything violent, never do anything cruel. You respond by becoming more of a kind-hearted or careful person, right? That is another response that does happen. And then there's also the doormat response. Well, this must be the way I'm supposed to be treated, so I'm going to let everybody treat me this way. All right, but the other response that people should be afraid of, if they think that it's okay to tolerate abuse of children, including sexual abuse of boys, if they think that it's okay to become callous toward an impoverished 15-year-old kid in a bad situation because, well, he's a juvenile delinquent. Who cares what happens to him? Well, you should. You should care. Never mind that labels like delinquent and inmate don't justify ignoring an individual's humanity. Forget that. Forget that we're talking about a kid who isn't fully developed, and putting those labels on him is wrong anyway, right? We're talking about a kid who is being molded. Harvard University and the U.S. Navy both found that a tendency towards sexual predation is not a common male behavior, right? There's 2 studies there that both demonstrate that it's only a minority of men who engage in this behavior, very small minority, and that they, generally speaking, have a broad spectrum of predatory or violent behaviors and a history of being abused. It's most common to victims of abuse. So, multiple sources indicate that a history of sexual exploitation by females specifically during youth is a significant factor for perpetration of sex crimes by men.
And we don't have to worry about all the men who killed themselves, because that's nothing to do with being abused by females.
The ones
Don't
that were
you
made
worry.
14 times more likely to kill themselves. They're 14 times more likely to take themselves out of the picture. They're gone. Holmes and Slapp also noted this. Sexually abused males were 4.4 times more likely to have forced someone into sexual contact than non-abused males. So something Allison has always pointed out, and I want to point this out too, right? 14 is bigger than 4.4. The primary response, if they're going to engage in violence because they have developed psychological issues because of the trauma of being sexually abused, the primary response males have when that happens to them as children is to self-destruct, to engage in violence against themselves. Some of them, a smaller number of them, burst outward instead and engage in violence against other people.
When girls get abused, they're more likely to become whores. When boys get abused, they delete themselves from the statistics. So, again, you don't need to worry about them.
Yeah, boys and girls have a different way of reacting to self-blame, right? Girls react with, I deserve this. Boys react with, I need to take myself out of the picture. I caused this. Solving the problem involves eliminating me.
And this is what y'all are encouraging. And I'm not talking to feminists right now, to traditionalists and so-called conservatives who go, nice. Oh, a 16-year-old boy was fucked by his teacher. Nice. Well, it's different for boys. Boys love it when they get statutorily raped by their teachers. Because, yeah, they definitely tell all their friends about how they fucked a teacher. What happens to them after that? It doesn't matter. It doesn't. It takes, like, on average 10 years before they kill themselves, so it's irrelevant. Like, it's not connected. There's no connection there. Don't worry about it. Just shut the fuck up. Boys love being raped by teachers. Shut the fuck up. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's not just, if you look at the substance abuse aspect of it, it's not just, they're 14 times more likely to use methods that are recognized as suicide attempts to kill themselves. They're up to 44 times more likely to engage in behavior that will ultimately kill them. When you think about it that way.
By the way, teenage girls who were statutorily raped by their male teachers don't even kill themselves. Not even 10 years later. They just go on to become OnlyFans whores.
Some do, but it's not the phenomenon that it is with boys, right? Girls who have been sexually abused do have a whole, they do have a whole spectrum of sequelae as well, and it's not less damaging to girls to be sexually abused. It's that when they engage in it, they get compassion from society, right? And of course, you also have the issue of a girl who is sexually abused who goes on to do OnlyFans where she wouldn't have otherwise. And maybe she's convincing herself that she thinks this is a good idea and she's really into it and she's proud of it and everything, when underneath, this isn't something she ever would have done, and actually she's traumatizing herself more by engaging in a bunch of impersonal intimacy and exposing herself and doing things that she can't take back, right? we're not allowed to tell her that's a bad idea because that's slut shaming. So we have to let her slide down the razor blade into the alcohol. We have to let her do that to herself, or else we're misogynistic. And then when she hits the alcohol and she starts screaming, then we blame men who were not involved in her initial sexual abuse and who were not the men she interacted with, or who didn't know the difference between her and the chick that's actually getting off on being on OnlyFans and is enjoying herself. We blame them and not the culture in which, instead of helping girls recover, we encourage their downfall and their self-injury. Like, the whole thing is convoluted and wrong. And all of that traces back to feminists during the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s desperately scrambling to gender these issues in order to fit their convoluted patriarchy conjecture that demonizes the entire male population as oppressors of women, hell-bent on keeping women subjugated and using violence and domination to do so. And they got government funding for it. Your tax dollars, or your dad's tax dollars, or your grandpa's tax dollars paid for this. And it didn't just pay for this. It paid to export this to Zimbabwe, to India, to Japan, to England, to Germany, to Russia, to China. Name a country that USAID has had any involvement in anywhere. Name a country that has had any kind of U.S.-funded, supposed humanitarian effort taking place. Guatemala, Brazil, any place the U.S. has set foot. Panama, Canada. This has been exported there. And men were robbed to pay for it.
Including the incels, by the way. And it's worth pointing out that many of these men, who were raped by women when they were underage, go on to become incels.
Yeah, and in fact, especially the incels, because they don't get tax deductions.
Yeah, that's who you're mocking when you talk about incel tears, folks. A lot of the time, it's disabled men who have no hope of ever escaping from this thing you call involuntary celibacy, which is virginity when it's women, but when it's men, you call it involuntary celibacy. In their case, it's very often because they are too disabled to achieve these things, and very often it's because they were raped by teachers or family members when they were very young, and so they can never even consider experiencing sexual intimacy because they were raped by women when they were younger. But it's okay because we don't call it rape.
Yep.
In a number of countries and states, we don't call it rape, so it doesn't matter. They weren't raped. They just had nice.
Yep. I think we're going to pick up with this next week and continue with it. There's a little bit more in this paper that I want to go over, and then there's two other things that I want to look at briefly. Not looking at the whole of, I think it's two. These might actually be, okay, no, these are two different papers. The next thing is actually the Koss paper, the paper that Koss was involved in. So we'll go there, and I'm probably gonna also do a little bit of rereading the actual rape prevalence paper that Koss wrote that statement came from. So next week we'll probably be talking about this a bit more, and then we'll get on to another area of funding, because there's a couple of other things I have that I want to get back to in terms of the export of what I've been highlighting here in various ways is the export of feminist ideas that are designed to reduce people's compassion for men overall. So we'll probably do a discussion where I kind of put a little bit of that all together before we actually get into talking about the U.S. exporting war to other countries in the form of interference with, there's been a number of times when the U.S. has actually enacted coups in other countries because the changes that they were going through in their culture and their government changes were not those changes that were preferred by the U.S. federal bureaucracy, as if they have a right to decide what every other country should do. So that's sort of a down the road look. But with that, I don't actually have super chats, super chows, or Rumble rants this time around to read to you. So I think we will cut it here and continue with this in 7 days. Should I say 7 days? So one character that I cosplay really well is that chick from The Ring, and I'm terrifying when I do it. So more so now than when my teeth were in better shape.
Enjoy your nightmares tonight, folks.
Yeah,
Hannah's going to be crawling out of your screen.
I have pictures. In the meantime, we will see you on Tuesday, and we will see you next Thursday.